when Hitler went after Britain, Operation Sea Lion, which was supposed to be at air first, in the air, and then by sea, and then by land. But it couldn't just come by land because it's an island. To invade Britain, you have to go across the channel. In order to go across the channel, you have to have a whole bunch of boats to take your army across. Napoleon found that out and couldn't invade. Many countries through the thousands of years have tried to invade Britain, and they weren't successful. In 1066, 1,000 years ago, the Normans invaded, and then that's about it. That was 1,000 years ago. They were invaded from France, and ever since then, the Normans became English, and that's who the English are. And so that's a nice little tank trap right there. that 20 miles. Now you can ride a car. We get on. It's basically a train. You can ride a train underneath the channel. It takes about an hour, maybe 2 hours altogether. Go and get in your car onto this train. The whole thing of buying a ticket and everything, and then wait in your car while you're on a train. Drive into this train, this big train, like the size of this room, like the width of it, and go in there and cars on both sides, and go in there and you just kind of wait. The train goes across underwater, the channel they call it, channel tunnel. But anyway, so now, but even now you think, well, somebody can invade Britain after 1,000 years now. Well, really, it's not like that, because Britain you could just sabotage that the tunnel real easily. Somebody's coming. It's like the Egyptians crossing the Red Sea, Bible times.
You start a single piece of C4 land.
Yeah. And so, in fact, they have that tunnel is like, there's a big tunnel for people, passengers like us, and then there's a big tunnel right next to it for all the big 18-wheelers, all the transportation. And then there's another tunnel, I think, in between. It's just for the emergency equipment. That's what I think that's what that was. And so people just going back and forth in case, because there was a fire there, like two big trucks ran into each other, and they started a fire, and they had to close down the whole thing. Right in the open, like the 90s sometime. And so that was really close to being awful. So, but anyway, so Britain is naturally defended. So even Napoleon, who had a gigantic army, and Hitler with a gigantic army, could not do it, because they have to control the channel. You have to control the water. In order to control the water, you have to have a navy, plus you have to control the air. And something we might not have talked about in here is, I'm a generalist. I'm not a specialist. I'm a teacher, but I'm a generalist, just so you know. I think you know that, right? If you just thought about it. I'm not a biographer of Hitler. I'm not a biographer of channel tunnels or tunnels. I'm not a specialist or scientist about tanks or anything. But I talk about all, in a general way. But if you want to talk to me more than about 15 minutes, that's all I know about tunnels, But so we're looking at World War II. So we're just getting exposed to World War II, and so we're getting in some details, and so we're thinking about it, trying to figure out. Okay, so but a generalist is saying here that we're looking at possible mistakes and things, but one thing to remember about we looked at World War I so much, we looked at revolutions, especially in Russia, and the war with Poland and Russia. Okay. Now we're in World War II, and the whole advances are kicked in, and also the capabilities and the overall abilities of all these armies and navies, and now there's air forces that are really important. The thing to remember is Navy is super important. In World War II, this is really crucial for getting men, the armies, lot of water invasions across water, and it's called amphibious invasion. Going across water and landing in army. It's not just Navy on Navy. There's a lot of that in World War II. Especially in Europe, the Navy is going to bring the army to invade. So the Navy is really important. But the Navy can really get eliminated at this point in the 1940s, like totally wiped out. No matter if it's a battleship, even an aircraft carrier to an extent. But those big ships that controlled World War I, the Battle of Jutland, and the big ships that can do so much, submarines and everything, that is no match at all for the air. The air is dominant. If air is going against sea, the air is just like, it's just easily victorious. And he's like, well, those battleships have all those big guns and things, but yeah, I mean, they do their best and they knock down some airplanes, but the air has superiority over in the air as well as over anything on sea, because think about the speed of these vehicles, airplanes, 100 miles an hour, 200, 300 miles an hour. Big ship, 15 miles an hour, 15. And a submarine, 12 miles an hour. You say, oh, they're under sea. I mean, that's what they're called. But from the air, you see them. They're near the surface, you can see them from the air. And so the other thing is, they're not always submarines. Okay, so you're saying a battleship, BS is a battleship. Aircraft carrier, you should know this, well, you won't memorize this. BS, AC, submarine, and then you have transports. So, and then you have transports. Transports, take the army. So these are the biggest, these are really slow, 20 miles an hour. Aircraft carriers, 20 miles an hour. Submarines are about 12 to 15 miles an hour. Think, well, they're under sea. But back in those times, not like now where a submarine can be under the ocean for months. The United States submarines, the nuclear submarines, they go under sea. You get on the boat, the subboat, and they go underwater and it doesn't come up for 6 months. And the reason it comes up is because it's out of food. Yeah, and it's not because of air. Yeah, it's just because they want to. But back in those times, the sub could be only underwater. Now here's a generalist kicking in. Continuously, just by the days, a few days. So they're constantly coming up. The submarines are constantly coming to the surface. And when they're coming to the surface, they're real slow. Air is so easy to hit a submarine in World War II from the air. So easy to knock out these things from the air. Very easy. Now, the thing that's the best protection by the Navy. Now, this is a general thing so that you will understand these battles. We're not going to talk too much about the Pacific Theater, which is mostly Navy. It's more of a combination than the European. The European is mostly a combination of it's a full combination, but mostly it's Army and air, and then Navy is third. The Pacific is very much air and Navy. How we defeated the Japanese. We had to have an Army, but Navy was crucial. And so we had that, especially aircraft carriers. If you look at that map way over there, just to look at a quick world map, you can see all the oceans. You have, well, this doesn't show the Pacific so much. The Pacific is really, how far away is this from that? Yeah, it's about 5,000 miles, maybe more like 7,000 miles. From California to China is 7 or so thousand. So that would be really where California is really like here. Okay, that's a good approximation. California is really about right. in perspective right there. Here's China and there's Japan. So Japan, you go.
Water.
Here's Hawaii, like right here. And California's right here. Yeah, it's really right by that wall. So that is a huge Pacific Ocean. Unlike this, it's leaving it off. And so like, oh, there's the Pacific. But it's really like, it's a whole nother map. It's just the Pacific should be there. So you can't win that with an army. You have to win that with a navy. You have to have air. And you have to have air too. You can't go over there with a whole bunch of submarines. Like, it's not going to work. You have to have carriers, aircraft carriers. So this is the thing that protects. If the Navy is a sitting duck to the air, the Air Forces, bombers and fighters, then how does the Navy even participate in this war? Aircraft carriers. The carriers are carrying aircraft. So on this particular ship, there's air. Who goes against that air, and it's equal. Yeah.
Aren't also the battleships also I think the aircraft carrier?
Yeah, and then the battleship. So how would you get to the aircraft carrier? So, well, there's a lot of things, but that's where the submarines have some ability. The submarines, what are they even used for? They're to hit the big ships. Yeah, the aircraft carrier, if they could. But how do you even get to the aircraft carrier? Well, you have air patrolling around, but also you have battleships, and there's these things called, it sounds kind of real generic here, but they're called destroyers. And that's a
If you're
large
like a battleship, you should know this.
Yeah, that's a large ship that's not as big as a battleship, but they're called destroyers because they destroyed subs. They made these things that just go after subs. They're faster than subs, and they can track subs underwater. They can be down half a mile down, and they're tracking them in World War II. They can hear them, and they follow them. Sonar, not radar, which is above ground, but sonar, which is getting, mainly it's underground, underwater, and it's reflection of noises. And so these destroyers protect the carriers and battleships, and so they all work together. All of this would be working together for a reason. Subs go after attack at big ships. Carriers are protecting the whole fleet, but they're also the ones that attack the opposing fleet. So you really, in World War II, battleships do not really do damage against other battleships like they did in World War I. This big fleet here would go against an enemy fleet. We're talking about 50 ships right here, a fleet. Like, let's say 4 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, 10 submarines, 20 of these transports, 10 destroyers. It'd be a fleet. They're going hundreds of miles, and there's an enemy fleet comparable to that. And how do they fight? Really, they don't come and hit each other. Their aircraft would attack them. Their aircraft would attack here. And it's by air, because air has superiority. Remember that World War II, that air is everything. And on land as well. If an army is fighting another army and they have a lot of tanks and things, who has air superiority? That's the question. And that's who wins the battle usually. And the Battle of France, air superiority was crucial. France lost that battle, and Germany got it, and Germany had air superiority at the crucial points. They had the crucial points where they came into France, and then they also had air superiority, down around Paris and all that. Now the part that where they didn't have air superiority was really around Dunkirk. So when Dunkirk happened, Operation Dynamo, on Father's Day it finished, and they got all the VF out, and that's where Britain put their whole air force over that evacuation so they could get the people across the channel. And the Germans did not contest it so much. And so a lot of people say, this Dunkirk, that whole thing, was probably his first sort of strategic mistake. Letting the VF get away, not contesting it, not moving the tanks in there, not making that like, let's eliminate that while we have them surrounded. The other, so then we have to come to the Operation Sea Lion. So Dynamo is the Dunkirk. Sea Lion is the overall to take Britain. And in order to do Britain, they had to control the channel. In order to control the channel, they needed air superiority, and they needed their navy. But they're not going to just put their navy there because they hadn't gotten air superiority yet. Remember that on all of these battles, every single one of them, all of the people, Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, Mussolini, Roosevelt, and all the generals are thinking, we got to have air superiority. You don't just go in somewhere without superiority. Yeah.
Can we all go on a field trip down to that battleship in Mobile? Whatever it's called.
Alabama.
USSR.
It's pretty good.
It's actually really cool.
It's from that era. Yeah. They used to have a submarine right next to it. I don't know. They do.
They do, it's just under the water.
Yeah, they do. They can probably come down.
That's
They
what
have an air museum there now too.
The great aircraft carrier, to look at it, is in Charleston. That's the closest one. I forgot which one it is, but aircraft carriers are gigantic. And
You can play football on them.
Yeah.
Like they're big enough to do that.
So the moral of all of this is the air superiority is key. If you don't have air superiority, you're not going to evacuate. If you don't have air superiority, you're not going to take that river. In World War II, air superiority is everything. How do you get air superiority? You have to control the air. You have to be superior in the air above whatever we're talking about. And how do you do that? Well, you send your Air Force up there and fight it out, and if you win, that means you control that. And if you can control that, you control the airspace above that area, then you can dominate the Army or the Navy. You see? Real basic. But that's sometimes not, that's a tactical thing, that's a tactic. But that's a crucial general tactic that you need to understand so you can understand the rest of the war. How things. So when we say, okay, here's the map of Operation Sea Lion, this is what they were going to do, this is what the Germans were going to do, they're going to drop some people here, and they're going to land here. But first, they're not going to just attack because they'll get killed, because this will not be successful at all because they do not have air superiority. And so how do you get air superiority? You have to have a fight in the air. And that's the Battle of Britain, to get air superiority over the channel. So that's what the Battle of Britain really is. It's not an invasion. It's the pre-invasion. We're trying to get air superiority. Now, who has the advantage? Britain has the advantage. One basic advantage is it's over Britain. It's over the English Channel. So they're fighting at home, especially the one when they're fighting in the Midlands and things like that. And so the Germans are coming from the Netherlands, from Belgium, from France, from Denmark, and from Norway. They have airports all through here. And so they're going to come and they're going to try to get air superiority. And that was a normal thing to go for. And so their intention was to bomb airports and hit the British airships on the ground if they can, hit all the ports and airports, and try to knock out the British fighter planes. That's the object, so that they can get air superiority. And so you can't get air superiority if the British fighters are all there. You have to knock them out. And so in essence, that's what battles on land are also. You and I, being generalists, might think, how do you defeat Russia? Well, take their capital of Moscow and they'll surrender. Well, that isn't the way it works. That's the way it worked, like in Napoleon's time or something, where there was a king, and you're like, oh, you got his palace. Like, where am I going to live? You know, but in modern times. So how do you defeat another country?
Beat them up until
Capture their leaders.
Well, you
Or-
can capture their
Or
leaders, but
threaten to kill citizens and stuff like that if you take over.
well, maybe. But there's a fail-safe way of usually defeating a country.
Blowing it up.
Well, blowing it up.
Threatening to blow up the polar
How do you
ice.
get another country to say, okay, I lost? It's not taking their king or their president.
You just-
Superiority and all the air, land, and sea.
What did you say? Yeah, no, okay, that's what we said, that some things that were part of it.
Did you attack the resources where they have no more?
Okay, yeah, so if they have no resources,
They can't fight.
that's right. And how do you do that? Like, what are you doing that makes them where they can't fight anymore? Resources is part of it.
Take out their.
Well, that's what she said. Besides resources, that's a long-term thing. That is.
You take out their army.
You take their army out. How do you get air superiority?
Take out the other.
You take out their air, and then you have air superiority. How do you get a land superiority? You take out their army. Now that's a real generic thing to say, but that's what wars are, battles are. How do you win? How do you get them to say you won? They don't have an army left. And how do you do that? Okay, that is where the battle is. That's what you're doing. You're not trying to capture. It's not like you on the beach. You capture the flag and run it back. It doesn't work like that anymore. You have to eliminate the people who are fighting you. You know, if you're wrestling, and I'm a wrestler, and you're a wrestler, and we're wrestling, who wins? Well, there's points and everything, or tennis. You have to get those points. But this is, what if you play tennis or wrestle like this, where you killed the person? Like you play so much where they just collapse. You have to. It's like an endurance game. Well, that's what war is. They just collapse. And it has to do with resources. It has to do with morale. It has to do with all. And does have to do with the leaders. But it's mostly about just killing them. Not okay. So that, in case you didn't know that, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing for people that have never done a lot of study of wars. That's what wars are. You're not trying to. Now Hitler was trying to massacre people. He was. That's what makes him. That's one of his mistakes. That's one of his long-term mistakes. Is they're trying to massacre the Jews. Why concentrate on the Jews and all these other things? Just let your generals do their expertise, and you would be better off. And a lot of people say that's a mistake, and that's true. But he's such a madman that wasn't a mistake. That's who he was. That's what made him. So a lot of people say they should never have invaded Russia. Well, what are you talking about? Are you talking about a real person here? We're talking about Hitler. Like, Mein Kampf is all about invading Russia. That's his whole point, is to invade Russia. That's what his essence is. He's not like, hey, you should never, you shouldn't, you're going to waste all your army. Wait, the whole army was to kill Russia. That's his essence of who his being is. So that's not a mistake. That's not his mistake. That's a mistake that is you. Yeah, if you were playing a board game, don't go for Russia yet. Yeah, but you're not crazy. He was a crazy dictator. So, like, why did he spend all that? If he hadn't spent all that time on the Jews, the Russia, they could have used all that transportation. The Jews would have been fighting for Germany. All these, you're in a fantasy world if you think that Hitler is not going to go after the Jews. That's what his first speech was in 1920. The Jews, like what are you talking about? You can't. So you can't. You don't lose sight of that. Is that sometimes people put Hitler in a category like he's a normal person. So, like, if you were just looking at it militarily, if you were looking at this as you, a sane person trying to fight a war, well, yeah, don't attack Russia right there. Wait a little bit and maybe do it a little differently. But okay, so that's that. So this is the very beginning. Is what they were trying to do is hit the British. How to get air superiority now. The Battle of Britain starts off where the Germans did what they were supposed to do in there's not a lot of corrections about this from military historians. is that they did the right thing. They basically, from the Green Line down, they had air superiority for a lot of times for a few weeks and days. And they were concentrating. You don't want to concentrate on Newcastle up here. First get this, and then move it to here, and then move it to here, and then move it, and then, okay, now we can fly over the whole country. Okay, let's put some men on some ships and land right here while we have air superiority, and then tanks. And that's how you take the country. It would be very difficult, but they had the right plan. Let's start minutia. Let's knock out. Think of this as your board game, and you're playing, and you're the Germans, and here are the British, and all these airports and radar stations. Fighter airfields are these purple, and then the bomber airfields are in the red. Okay, that's them. Okay, so let's see. The yellows are, no, that's not it. So the airfield, radar stations. Okay, so we're looking at the blues and the purples is what you want to knock out. You want to knock out the radar stations because that tells the British how many is coming and when they're coming. You can knock out the radar stations and then also knock out these airports so that the British fighters cannot land at these airports. They have to land back here. And what would that be an advantage? Because then they could get air superiority right here, right? So they're knocking out the radar stations and their ports, the seaports as well as the airport. And so that was the very beginning. But the Royal Air Force did very well. So the Royal Air Force, the RAF here, has some superior moments. Of course, they've got a much better leader and able to delegate to other people. And great quotes here. Never was so much owed by so many to so few. Mainly, they were talking about, Churchill put it, about 300 fighters were controlling the air superiority over Britain. Now, those 300, they lose 20, they make 20 more. So Britain, in their factories, was producing just enough to recover their losses. So every day they lose 20 or 30 or 50, and they would be producing about 20. And so if they lost 50 in a day, they're going backwards. Overall, they need 300 to control the whole country. 300 fighters is all it was. And that's why they say never was so much owed by so many to so few. There's really just 300 heroes at a time. And another advantage of being at home was when you knocked down a British fighter, he parachuted home. When you knocked down a German fighter, he parachuted and he's gone for the rest of the war. He parachuted into the Channel or into England, and he was captured. He's captured and put into a war prison for the rest of the war for 6 years. So big advantage. So the Germans were producing at a rate of less than 20 a day. So the Germans, their industry was producing less than the British. So they probably started off just in a general statement here is like 2 to 1. Germans had an advantage of 2 to 1. So they had about 600, 700 fighters. So we're talking about fighters against fighters. Fighters are small aircraft like those, like this, 1 man or 2 man. And the Germans typically in their fighters, they had more like 4 people in them. Another disadvantage is they had a lot of people that would be in their fighters. So they trained 4 guys to do a fighter, and if they got shot down, there's 4 guys who are lost for the war. Britain would have 1 guy in the fighter, or 2, and if they got shot down, well, it's just 1 if he lost his life, but he would fall at home. So big advantage when you're talking about fighting, 20, 50 people dying every night, or the planes dying, getting shot down. What happens? How do you win that? So it was about a 3-month battle. July, August, September. That's what the Battle of Britain was. These are So people all over England looked up and they saw things like this, dogfights where you don't know who's winning. It's just, I don't know if you guys, when you hear an old, not an old, but like a single engine or double engine plane flying over your house today, and it's not like a jet. Think of like 1,000 of them. You can't even.
Now they're all shooting at each other.
And it's every night. And so, and then at the end of the war, you had all the British and the Americans were there, and they have every single day 1,000 airplanes going to Germany to bomb. During the day, the British in the day, the Americans at night. The Americans by day and the British by night. Of course, it's better at night, but the Americans would go in the daytime into Germany. 1,000 bombers. Now, one of those mistakes, so Hitler's mistake was Dunkirk. The thing quickly that we probably remember, so the British had basically 2 fighters on our outline. There's somewhere there it says like what kind of, they had better fighters. They did have a little bit better capabilities in their fighters, and the British concentrated on fighters. Fighters are defensive. When I say fighter, you think, well, fighter, what is this, a boxer? That's the term for a defensive small airplane. Now, it could be offensive, but it's mainly a defensive weapon. And the British could concentrate on that. So the think about, what the Germans had to do to knock out an airfield, it's not with those, not with fighters. They had to have what's called a bomber. And that is a slow, larger airplane that drop bombs. It's called a bomber. Fighters are the ones that fight for air superiority. That's why they're called fighters. And so the Germans had a task of they had to bomb, but they had to protect their bombers from the British fighters. So they also had to have fighters. So they had fighters like little mosquitoes, and a slow bomber is protected by fast fighters. And the British only had one task: knock down these. And so they had to, the way to get through, you had to get through what's called as a screen of German fighter planes. And so they would knock them down and then knock these down if they could. These are going very slow, like 100 miles an hour. You know, that's slow. And you guys were riding in a plane, it's like 500 miles an hour usually. That's going to Atlanta or something. Like 400 miles an hour. You know, it takes off at 150. But those bombers in World War II were just like 150 miles an hour tops. And so, and they had to go across the channel, and then the British knew by radar where they were attacking. And so it was quite a difficulty. So they had to get through the 2 types of British fighters. This is the Spitfire, and this is the Hurricane, or we call it the Hurricane in America. And so you can sort of see the difference. You can see the Spitfire look is sort of like, to me, it's sort of shaped like this, and the Hurricane is more like, I don't know, kind of like that a little bit. You see, it's sort of like a shimmer. Yeah.
Or needle-like.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of conceded that they would really have a target on the plane.
And the Germans, the Air Force was headed by best friend or whatever, closest guy to Hitler, and his name is Hermann Goering. And you should know the high command. We're going to talk about the Third Reich today, and we're going to talk about, we're going to take a break from the war and get into the Third Reich a little bit, but and what we don't cover, I'll post it for your homework. But here's the thing. So these are German bombers right here, and Henkels, and they're very slow. And that was a mistake that you have to say Hitler's a big mistake was in the Battle of Britain. Actually, a long-term problem was that there was no large bombers like the Americans had and the British, especially the Americans. Americans figured out probably our best thing. These are really good subs and aircraft carriers and stuff, but we had the best bombers. We made these gigantic bombers for the time. They could drop thousands, hundreds and hundreds of bombs, you know, each time they go over. And it had lots of, you know, had like 6 or 8 people in them, and they had a lot of machine guns, a lot of defense. They were slow, and they had good armor on it, so they wouldn't get shot down by just simple shooting. But they were large. In other words, sometimes we call that heavy. They're heavy bombers. Heavy, meaning they can carry a lot of bombs. Because if you're going to go 30 miles or 100 miles over here to bomb your enemy, you don't want to go over there like in World War I and throw one out the door. In World War I, dropping, they're spitting and throwing rocks. It's stupid. It wasn't a bomber. It was more of just, it was just to look at the, you know, just to fight the other. It wasn't really a thing in World War I. You know, it wasn't really significant. But in World War II, they come over, the Germans would come over with like 10 or 20 bombs, and they'd let them out. You know, do a lot of damage. But would you rather drop 20 bombs or 200 bombs?
20 bombs.
You'd rather have 200 dropping on them. And so the Americans had heavy bombers, and they're going to go over and bomb whatever happened to Britain in the Blitz and the Battle of Britain. Was here's how much they got bombed right here. Like, this is how much they got bombed. If you can put it like from the ground up to here, this is how much Germany bombed Britain right here. At this level. Then if you want to know how much the Americans bombed Germany, go up to the first cloud in the sky. That's how much we bombed them. We bombed them to H. You know what I'm saying? We bombed them like, you want to kill somebody, you want to like just obliterate their country? We bombed Germany like that. At the end of the war, when Hitler committed suicide, took his own life, we had air superiority over the whole country. We were flying over it like looking for things. There was nothing to bomb. There was nothing to bomb. It was like there was a church. Like that, the whole country is obliterated. You know what I'm saying? We did that with Japan and Germany. In the last year of the war, we're like flying like, is that something? No. But don't hit the church. Oh, there's a synagogue. Don't hit that. Oh, what? Is that a kindergarten? Don't hit that. There's some kids. Don't hit that. We obliterated everything. And don't ever forget that. So and the whole world knows that about us. And we did that because we were trying to win. If you're going to win, we're going to obliterate them. And even Hitler and Stalin didn't do that. We did that. Well, let's stop the war. You want to fight a little bit more, or do you want to end it? That's our mentality. If we're going to fight, I'm going to obliterate you. You want to fight? Okay. I'm going to kill your whole country. And, well, I'm just so you know, I think we're righteous in that. You know, not really righteous, but, you know, in terms of the way people look at wars. We were right in doing that. But I want you to know that part of learning, your learning experience is you're Americans. And most of the world don't look at that as a badge of honor. Just so you know. Like, you obliterated Italy. You obliterated Germany. Yeah. And you obliterated Japan. You dropped 2 bombs on them and they couldn't even surrender.
Compared to the original land invasion of Japan would have been, it was actually much safer than.
That's right. That's right. You're exactly right. We're gonna talk all about that. You're right. Like, we're trying to save lives. Did it save lives?
Yeah.
Definitely. Americans were completely saved. And if you know, you want to cut him with a knife? Why don't we just use knives and try to beat Germany just with knives? Like every single citizen will be cut up. Like, you want that? That's not humane. Bomb it until there's nothing left. They don't have any resources. They don't have any army. They don't have any air force. There's nothing to fight with. And then the guy will finally kill himself. Then it'll be over. You know, if he was not crazy, he would have surrendered like in 1943, and Germany would have been really big. I mean, people would have, Stalin probably would have done it. And that's
Stalin would have done what?
Would have had Stalin and Hitler, if they had, like they did in the beginning of the war, they could have come together and say, okay, nobody's winning. Let's just stop where we are. I think they could have worked that out.
During
Then what would we
like
have done?
Half a year.
That would have been, oh, so hard. He would have had half Europe, he would have still had France, and then he turn all that, and he has peace with Russia, and then he turns it back on Britain, and we'll never land in France. We'll never have D-Day. That would have been a problem. But then that's I'm playing that same part, same game you guys might have thought like that was a mistake. There's no way he's going to deal with them. He's got to kill Russia. He has to kill Russia. That's who Hitler was. Kill Jews, kill Russia. That's what you have to do. France and Britain and America are just in the way. That's not really a thing. Okay, so Britain had advantages in having the great leadership, had the great machines, the fighters, the best fighters, the better fighters. The Messerschmitts of the Germans were not as good. Hugh Dowding was awesome with Churchill really didn't do this. It was mainly Dowding. Where do you put those 300 fighters? Where do you have 300 fighters and there's 800 German fighters and another 1,000 German bombers coming. Where do you use your 300? You don't just say the first group. Don't just spread them out with 5. So you lose everywhere. You have to figure out how you're going to win. That was the genius, the hero of that. Hugh Dowding was the one who literally, you can see old videos of this, go on YouTube and say Hugh Dowding with his maps and stuff. And you can see where they have them, they know the Germans are coming, they're going to bomb, they're coming to London or some part of London, and they have to say, okay, we're going to divert 200 there, I'm going to save back 100. They always had reserve, they're always just trying to, and it's all like you're playing a big game, like they have little markers for every single fighter squad, and they're listening. This whole room, all of us would have our headsets on and listening to people up in the air, where they are and what they're doing. And so they're keeping up with it, and then we would say, okay, number 27, blue is over, near Coventry or something like that. And so you would be moving on a stick, like putting it on the map in the right place. It's really amazing. Anyway, Hugh Dowding is a hero of that. It's how to fight this battle, which no one had ever done this before, an air battle to save the country. So once they had won, so the long-term mistake in the Battle of Britain was they didn't have large bombers. They went to all that trouble having hundreds of bombers to come over, and even if they let them go, they only did minimal damage. You know, to understand. They didn't knock out the port. They didn't knock out the radar stations enough. They had to, so the Americans 4 years later had these gigantic bombers and would drop hundreds and thousands of bombs on the same spot. And so you could knock out stuff. And so even though they weren't very accurate, bombers in World War II generally were not very accurate. It was probably like in the scale, here's a generalist talking, about 15% accuracy, just so you know. So if you only have 10 or 20 bombs, and only one's really going to be accurate, or two, it hits, it's not enough damage. But the Americans dropping 1,000, well, 200 are going to be accurate. There's some damage, you see. It's not that they were so Americans weren't more accurate. They just had much more. Just like dump the whole thing out. Something's going to hit. So the mistake was no large bombers. The next big mistake that happened also in the Battle of Britain is that Hitler changed the targets. The first targets were the radar stations and what? The airports, which is normal. That's what you do. Knock out the radar stations and knock out the airports with the machines on the ground if you can. But Hitler changed the targets to the cities. He's going to knock out the big cities now and knock out the morale of the British and make them cry and make them suffer. So they'll hate war and they'll tell their politicians, let's get out of the war. My whole family was killed. Things like that. And that sounds right. But in World War II, that did almost nothing. It did almost nothing to Britain. It just made, and it did nothing to Germany too. If we look at primary sources, all these people that nobody was Hitler's friend. nobody was a Nazi, they became defenders of Germany because we were bombing them, obliterating them. And so we were not trying to bomb their cities, we're trying to bomb their industry, their resources, and armies. You don't really bomb armies very well, but you can bomb factories and cities. And it really wasn't effective. The height of Germany's industry, their economy, was really in the fall of 1944. That was the height, and we had air superiority bombing them. That was their height of their industrial might while we were bombing them. And then there was nothing on the surface. They put factories under the ground. Germans survived, and the people contributed. People like, I'm going to defend Germany. Not the Nazis, I'm defending Germany. So the morale in Japan, nothing happened. They didn't surrender because we dropped bombs on their cities. They surrendered because they knew that we could eliminate every single city. You know, so they figured it was going to get worse and worse. It wasn't because all the people they'd already been bombed by us and with regular bombs. Like you were saying, like, which is it worse, to be bombed by 1,000 bombs where everybody dies, or one bomb and everybody dies? Which way do you want to die? By 1,000 bombs or one bomb? No, if you were the dying person.
Oh.
You'd rather do it by one? Well, maybe so.
Well,
so even on the dying side.
There'd be a lot more fear involved with it, and who knows if all the smaller bombs, if you die of shrapnel or something.
Yeah, and it's worse because it's not, you know, the one bomb at least is like, where am I? I'm in heaven. You know, like, I don't even know what happened.
So gotcha.
Like, I love this place. You know, but the other way, like, you know, like, God, health insurance? I hate that. You know, those kind of stupid questions. Yeah.
You know, we're always scared about other nations growing the world. It's like America has a high bombing artillery. The entirety of ever.
Second highest, Russia.
Well, Russia also.
Anyway, this is a way of looking at, not to be negative on our own people, but it's just a way, you know, I think if you look at it objectively, we did the right thing. You know, we did the right thing, and I think it holds up with sources. But being objective is, I want you to know what other people think, and so brace yourself. Yeah.
This is what this is. Attacks were effective when concentrated on. Is that for the?
Yeah, that's the radar stations and the airports. So this word attrition was basically, it's a slow chip type of war, type of battle. And the RAF won that. But there was some big mistakes in that this is a long-term mistake. They should have had large bombers. You would think they would have large bombers. So that was a mistake. And that was really Hitler's mistake and Goering's mistake. You know, they had very good tanks and very good other things, and a lot of good things, but that was a big strategic problem. And they never adjusted. You know, but when they could have adjusted, they were trying to be defensive. So they had really good, by the end of the war, the Germans had really good fighters for defense. But anyway, that was crucial when you're fighting Britain. You don't have the best fighters, and you don't have the best bombers. That's going to be a problem. Okay, then this is just like Dunkirk. Letting Dunkirk go was a strategic mistake. You're going to let Britain go, their army's going to get away. And then you're going to change to the cities. Okay, you're going to lose the Battle of Britain now. Because now we're fighting at so you're knocking out London, you're knocking out big cities, and people are crying about it, but you're not hitting their industry, you're not hitting their airports, you're not hitting the radar stations. So Britain is able to build up their air force and build up their fighters, and so they won the Battle of Attrition. They knocked down more Germans by a rate of like 3-1 every single night. And so by September, the end of September, I forgot what day, might have been the last day, September the 30th, Hitler said, like, okay, let's stop doing that. We're losing our whole air force, and we haven't even beat them yet. Let's just call off Sea Lion and use our army and our navy and our air force somewhere else. You know, so his whole idea was Russia. Always remember that. Is Hitler, is defeat Russia. That's what his whole thing is. Well, why do they go after Britain? Well, you can't go after Russia until Britain is defeated. You don't want to fight World War I again. That's not going to work. A two-front war. And so that's why they made a deal with Stalin. So, okay, we're going to do a deal. I'm going to knock them out, and then I'm going to go kill you later. And Stalin should have known that. You did the reading on that. Like Stalin, he did know that. But he thought, Stalin said, I'll make a deal with him, and he'll go back to them, and then what will happen? It'll be like World War I again, but I won't be in it. They'll fight on the Western Front for 4 years, and I'll build up, and I'll take the Baltic, I'll take Finland, I'll take parts of Romania, maybe Turkey, maybe down here. And then when I'm ready, I'll attack Germany. But instead of it lasting 4 years, it was really, he knocked out France in 6 weeks. Whoa. that was a 4-year guy. That was a 6 weeks. He went in 6 weeks, so then he's going to go after Britain. And so, so Stalin miscalculated that. But not as big a miscalculation as Hitler, right? So the war of attrition, that's where it's chip by chip, and, plane by plane, and it really just looked like, wait, we're going down this much, and they're going up this much. Okay, let's just stop. It's like at a gambling table. Like I'm gonna throw the dice, and if I roll a 7, I win. 5. Yeah, you got $5. Okay, do it one more time. A 4, you got another $5. This doesn't roll 7 at all, does it? Like 3, 12, 8.
Wait, there's
Where is a 7? 7. Okay, you got a 5. Yeah, but I lost 20. I don't want to play this game anymore. That's about Britain. It wasn't like we lost, we surrendered. Like, this doesn't work right. We lose 4 and we gain 1. If you do the slot machine, you win one time. Ah, got $1. You put in $50. You got $1. It makes a noise. Like you got a lot. You've been putting in dollars for 50 minutes. It's an awful experience. So that's attrition. You should know that word. So strategic change from airfields to terror bombing. Now, the truth of this is a little slippery about why did they do that? But a lot of this goes to Churchill. What happened in the midst of the Battle of Britain, Churchill sent his bombers to bomb Berlin at night, just on a random night, away from the Battle of Britain is here. They're like, what do we do with our bombers? We should do our bombers with something. They'll bomb Berlin. He just went over there and tried. Hitler went crazy. They're bombing Berlin?
I mean, they're not even.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to bomb you. And so he took their mind off of the good strategy. And that's what you can do with a madman. So Churchill provoked. I don't know if he meant to do that, but there was a lot. Look into that. There's a good research on that. There's a lot of books about that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I don't know if that's the only thing, but that is a thing that got Hitler's mind off of the good strategy. Like, they bombed Berlin. Well, we're going to bomb London. We're going to bomb London 10 times what you bombed London. That's a mistake. You need to keep going after the radar stations and the airfields. So what did the Londoners do? Of course, they stayed in the subway. So Hitler's mistakes at Dunkirk, Battle of Britain, long-term and short-term. So what do we have here that I needed to put? German Navy. Well, the German Navy long-term was also not a match. That's why they had to do the Battle of Britain. If the Navy was so great, they probably could have done something different. Other short-term, so from ports to cities, no radars, calling off sea line before starting Barbarossa. That's what we just have been talking about. In some ways, that's not really. If we're talking about, if you know what Hitler is, there's no way he's going to call off Barbarossa. But the thing is, a lot of people look at this and say, I think you would agree, like, okay, we know what happened in history. What could he have done? What could Hitler have done? Knowing he's a madman, he's definitely got to go after Russia at some point. What could he have done differently? Besides the bombers and the targeting of the cities. What could they have done?
Not kill Jews.
Besides that. Like, he's going to do those things.
Just not go after Russia until after he completed stuff in the West.
That's right. So that's the option. Do you do a two-front war, or do you just stick with the one-front strategy? because you got peace with Stalin. They signed the agreement, and Stalin's going to just appease Hitler. We saw that. Even if when they were spying on Stalin, he didn't say anything. He just, please don't do anything. You're my best friend. He went out of his way to show what a groveler he was. Stalin is killing his own people. So the way is, how could you figure out how to defeat Britain? Well, probably just switch this, start making these. And that's years down the road. But it probably would have turned out at least equitable to what happened. Okay, so anyway, that's it. 1940, now while this was happening, what else was happening in the world was the Italians were in North Africa and actually did pretty well against the British. Of course, all the British are trying to survive it in their homeland. And so if you see this from here to here, this is the Maghreb Desert, is the Italians went from here to here, and then later in the year, the British moved them all the way back, or in the winter. So where is that on this map right here? It's really just like right here. The Italians went from here to here. And that was a pretty good advance. They could have gone farther, and the British did not have their main army down there yet. You know, the BEF was still here. And so the Italians did pretty well at the very beginning. Now, if you remember the mobile warfare of the Eastern Europe, that's a lot like the desert warfare. In the desert, it's going to be Britain mostly against Germany and against Italians. So you can see Mussolini, the farthest extent of what he had. A little bit of Greece, a little bit of Albania, a little bit of Egypt, a little bit of Tunisia. The other thing the Italians invaded was Greece. Now, this was unexpected. He thought he would pick on a third-rate country after taking Albania in 39 and 40. So this is while the Britain is going on, Italians go after Greece. Now, this was a shock to everybody, especially to Hitler, because now Hitler knows that the Italians are not going to do very well, and he's going to have to bail them out. And so you can see by this, the Greek-Italian war was actually won by the Greeks. The Greeks actually defeated the Albanians, and they run them back into Albania. I'm sorry, the Italians and Albanians. So the Italians attacked from here and made some headway, but then they had to move all the way back. And so that's pretty pitiful. Big Italian fascist army defeated by this, just a tiny little country. Of course, it's a hard country to defeat, very mountainous and so forth. The Italians show their qualities very bad. So you should find that on your outline. A little bit later in 1940, still the Battle of Britain is basically going on. The British figure out, so here's the thing, the British are trying to think about, okay, we got to save Greece, and we got to help Greece, and we also have to save, the homeland, but they also have to save North Africa. So they went and sank the majority battleships of the Italian fleet. Now this is in Taranto, which is down here in Italy. So, about right there. So you can see the British, how they have access to just about everything because they have geographic advantage in the, over here, Gibraltar, Malta, and Egypt, Suez Canal. And so they have the big fleet. The British have a major fleet up here in Scapa Flow, which is like the north of. This is where their major fleet is, their naval fleet. You would think, like, oh, it's in London. No, it's up here. This is where it's called Scapa Flow. And the Germans at the beginning of the war sent submarines into those rivers and sank some of their big ships. Very beginning of the war. Awesome. So big fleet here, big fleet at Gibraltar, another one at Malta, and the other one in Alexandria. So the British are everywhere. They're little, but they're everywhere. And so that came and hit this is like a forerunner to the bombing at Pearl Harbor. This is the British did this to the Italians, and then the Japanese knew about this. One year, that's what we're going to do something like that.
Then they make the greatest mistake of ever.
Well, again, you think like that was a mistake, but what they want to do, how you do anything with America still in it? You got to hit America. You got to like, boom, one hit. Maybe they'll fall down.
It's funny because it's like they hit them and it's all American.
Okay, so the Italians are in North Africa, but they're kind of losing now. So the Germans have to help the Italians in Greece, and they have to help the Italians in North Africa. So they send one of their best generals, one of the people that defeated France, named Erwin Rommel, and they send him to North Africa. And he goes down in history as the Desert Fox, one of the best generals. Now, they talked about how the Americans had the best bombers and probably the best submarines and things like that. And we had some good leaders. But in terms of generals, infantry, and tank generals, the Germans had so many compared to the Americans. Americans did not have the experience. I mean, just looking at some of this, you'll notice how much experience gap there is by the time we get into the war. I mean, so much has happened. They've already gone through Denmark and Norway and Poland and the Low Countries and France, and now they're going to go into the Balkans, and they've gone into North Africa. And the United States has not been in any war, not anything like this since World War I. You know, so we're going to be way behind in terms of leadership and experience and so forth. Not equipment, but in leadership. So fast forwarding through your outline, there's two countries that erupt into that Hitler has got to sort of put out some fires, and one is Yugoslavia and the other one is Greece in the spring of 1941. So the war is spreading, and Britain is still alive, but it's alone. Germany is, no one's fighting against Germany really except for Britain. I mean, there's little countries like Greece and Yugoslavia, but Britain is truly alone. America is not really helping yet, and Russia is a friend, so it's really a bad situation. Now, on that outline, we probably have the thing where change the target, the Battle of Britain, and so forth, and then it comes the Blitz. The Blitz is where they start hitting the cities. That's what that is. Don't get confused. The Battle of Britain wasn't really the cities. That was the change of the target. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? So this actually can be considered a mistake or some sort of a mistake because this was crucial as Barbarossa starts in the invasion of Soviet Russia. These two countries delay the attack by at least a month. So they were trying to attack in May, but they end up attacking at the end of June the 22nd. And that's crucial months when you get into the Battle of Moscow, December, it could have been in November. And so most historians say, if it wasn't for Yugoslavia and Greece, Hitler probably would have gotten to Moscow. And we don't know what would have happened at that point. Like, if we got Moscow, they could have knocked out some industry, could have knocked out some more armies, which you need to do.
The government had already moved.
The government had already moved, but still, you're trying to knock out Russia's army. And I think they definitely would have done better in November rather than in December. Greece is a unique little situation. Of course, right before this, Greece defeated Italy, around Albania. Well, Germany came to its aid, Italian aid, and just made mincemeat of the Greeks and the British army that was sent. Now, here's Churchill, and the British had this predicament in 1941, in the spring of 1941. Okay, the Blitz is going on, they're doing well here, just defending, but they have to keep their Air Force here, they got to keep their army here, because if they lose that somehow, then Germany, at any time could land there. So they have to protect this, obviously. Okay, but down here, they have to fight the Italians and now Rommel down here. Right? So they have to put an army down here with their tanks. But Greece is going. And so they had a lot of fires to put out, the British did. And so they made somewhat of a mistake But maybe not. But here's the thing: they have an army here, and they divided that army, the British army, and sent half of it to defend Greece, half to defend Egypt. And so, in many ways, they lost both of them. So they lost Greece because they just, it's just very difficult, and they were just, it's an awful place to try to defend all these peninsulas, all these armies. I mean, ask any ancient army of a long time ago. Greece has always been very difficult to take and also to defend. It's just a hodgepodge of geographic topography. Anyway, this battle actually, the Germans, I mean, look at this. Berlin is this, how many thousands of miles is this? They take Crete by air, drop parachuters into Crete. In 1941, the Germans are everywhere. Their one defeat is against Britain. They just went through the Balkans all the way to here and then took Crete too. Why would you want Crete? Because the British, if they don't take it, the British will have it. Well, who wants that big island? Well, that island could be like a big aircraft carrier. You put bombers there and you're bombing right here. You're bombing. You're knocking out all these resources, and you can't have the British on Crete. So they take Crete, the Germans do. It's amazing. That's an amazing feat. Just an amazing thing. Right? In 1941, what was America doing? It's like nothing. Like nothing. This is where. This is before the battle. The Band of Brothers even started. They hadn't even started training yet. And the Germans had experience. So by May 1941, this is the German Empire. Now that doesn't show this part of North Africa. It's about this much too. All the way to Crete. These are friendly countries. There's Poland. Okay, Finland is also friendly. They're going to allow them to move armies there, and Finland's going to fight. Finland's going to fight with Germany.
And Switzerland are always white.
Yeah. Okay, so there it is, the question mark of a mistake of Barbarossa. Looking at today's outline. Look at today's outline. Barbarossa, general question. Was it Hitler's mistake? That's something we need to just think about. We'll just be thinking about over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, it's mistakes. But on the other hand, he's crazy. So anyway, that's the general question. German General Plan East. So this goes to Mein Kampf. This goes back to who Hitler was. What was the whole point of Germany reuniting, and where are they going to spread to? They're going to spread to Eastern Europe. That's what that means. And it's specific. By the way, those people right there, this is Hess, like right-hand man to Hitler. This is Himmler, the head of the execution SS and all of the terrible, terrible people that are doing the Holocaust and everything. And also this is Himmler and Heydrich, or the death squad. You can see on their, well, you can barely see in their skull and bones. And you can't really see it. I'm just nowhere to look. So these are, and there's Frank. These are just the worst of the worst of the Nazis. These are the ones who kill people. These are the ones like, we gotta kill every single one. I mean, that's what they go to sleep at night. Like, hey mom, how many Jews you go on Sunday? These are the demonic people. I'm laughing. I'm sorry. It's so terrible. I should be crying. But these are the ones. General Plan East. Don't ever forget World War II. World War II in Europe is about Hitler going east. That's the whole thing. And all these other things are sideshows. That in terms of like, what is it? Where is it from? Like, why did World War II come? Oh, they wanted Britain. No, they didn't want Britain. They were not going after Britain because Britain wouldn't let them go east. Why did they go after Russia? Oh, that's east. Why did they go after France? Because France didn't let them get away with murder. We're going to attack people who don't let us get away with murder. If you let us get away with murder, we're going to get murdered. And then Russia was the murdering place. And that's where the Holocaust is going to take place. So jot down, this is what they had planned. Where are the Germans going to resettle? They're going to resettle in like Ukraine and Belarus and the Baltics. These are ancient places where Germans had settled. and they're going to resettle that. And these are places where there's a lot of Jews who happen to live. And they, of course they knew that. That's why the Jews are a target. You're in our German areas. So, Army Group North, this is the plan. Army Group Center, of course, actually this is what happened. Army Group South. Army Group North, there's von Leeb and that's not Guderian, that's Huppner up there at the top. I mean, just look at this. How many people comparable did the Americans have? How about nobody? Nobody. And this is just against Russia. And there's another 3 or 4. They're easily better than Patton, George Patton, who's our best one. And he's going to be comparable, but he's one. We have one army through World War II that's comparable to this. One. And here's just some. Now, we have a lot better president than Hitler. And that's why we won that thing. Okay, so Army Group Center, that's von Bock. This is Guderian. Of course, that's on your outline, right? But make sure you know that's Army Group Center. And that's Hoth. These are tank commanders. These are tank commanders with 500 tanks each. And they know how to use them. And they're gonna just sift through. Awesome. This is World War II. This is something when you think what Americans did not experience, what Russia's going to experience, what Germany's going to experience. This is my ancient Barbarossa map that I got a long time ago. It's all ripped up from who knows what. And this is the way the Russians, this is their history. This is the Russia history. Like, this is what happened to us. This is what happened. And that's why it's called, what's this war called? The Great Patriotic War. It's not World War II in Russia. It's the Great Patriotic War. And it's not the Patriotic War. It's the Great Patriotic War. Because the Patriotic War was another war. Who wrote that? Who wrote that Patriot? And I edited your paper.
I wrote Patriot. I think I wrote...
Anyway, it should be the Great Patriotic. Don't forget. The Patriotic War was what war?
The war in order to get.
What?
Moscow?
Was it the revolution?
No, it goes farther back. It's when Napoleon went and burned Moscow. It was in 1812. That's the Patriotic War to the Russians. Patriotic War. This is the Great Patriotic War. Don't make it so tough.
Extra concentrated.
It's like, don't you just know Stalin said, okay, this is the Patriotic War. We already have one of those. What? No, we don't. Yeah, look at all the papers. Well, he can't erase all those. He wanted to erase all those. Okay, what is the Great Patriotic War? That is so Soviet, so communist. Come up with another name. Okay, so anyway, you have those in the right places. Notice how far they went. Look, I mean, this is incredible. This is incredible. So Leningrad. They were in Leningrad within 2 months. Moscow, it took a little bit longer. But here is what the Marx plan is. What were their objectives? Leningrad, Moscow, and Ukraine. Leningrad, Moscow, Ukraine. Well, you know, the text that we were looking at, they said Kiev, but it was really a little more extended than that. So on the eve of Barbarossa, they dominate that much. German military preparations, all obviously everybody knew it was coming. Hitler, he hadn't gone completely crazy yet. He's eternally crazy, but he has not gone crazy yet. And what Marx said, when you know they're going to lose and you know that he's really gone, is when he fires people like Guderian and von Bock and Brauchitsch and all these people who were geniuses. He fired them and said, I'm going to do the math. I'm going to tell you who's attacked where. Okay, they lost. Never made good decisions. Because before, he wasn't making the decisions. He was just saying, win, take them, take France, get them. And then they say, well, can you look at our plans? And he's like, yeah, what's going on? Oh, yeah. And then that's how they conquered Europe. Then in Russia, they had some problems, and so he said he fired people. He fired people like Guderian, probably the best tank commander of all World War II. He fired him like, get out. He treated him like, who knows what, like a little poodle or something. And Guderian wrote about it. It's ridiculous. Okay, the advantages. Soviet preparations. Here's the Soviet High Command. Now, they were comparable, especially Zhukov. Timoshenko, not so much. But this was their Stalin, and then there's Timoshenko and Zhukov. Just know those names, especially Zhukov, Georgy Zhukov. Soviet advantages and strengths. Now, here's something that'll blow your mind. This is most people, most people would say, well, don't tell them this stuff. Deep. No, it's not that too deep. I mean, the words are deep. But here it is. The Russians had the strategy. What became World War II strategy and tactics and how to win this war? Those were the Soviet. Those were the theories and the concepts were born in Russia, not in Germany, not in America, certainly not in Italy or Britain. Now, all of them came to learn it. It started in the Soviet Union. The battlefield is in depth. You don't just win the battlefield. You win this battlefield, and you're going to win the next one, too. You're going to take a whole country. It's not like World War I, where you let's see what happens. Okay, so USSR was the first country to recognize there was a third level. It's not just tactics and then the strategy. There's other things in between. Like, you take this hill, you take this battlefield, and then you take the country, but what about in between? There's a lot of stuff that goes in between. And they put this down on paper. How did they come up with this? The things that you and I have talked about. They lost against Japan, doing that stupid old way of doing it. Lost against Germany, doing that stupid old way of doing it. They lost to Poland, even under the Soviet Union, early days. Like, we need another strategy. We're good at, like, winning right here, but then we lose the war. Keep going. How do you keep going? You got to have motorizing. Do you know all this? You got this written down? Yeah? Okay. Because you can't know it. You can't memorize it. I know it comes easy. This is not hard. Jot it down. Yeah.
If you go back and start the Russian.
Zhukov. That's a word that means bug, a beetle. His name is Zhuk. Zhuk is a beetle. Tough beetle. He's the one guy who, at the end of the war, this was like our Eisenhower. He rivaled Stalin. Stalin had him. Thank you. Okay, questions. How the Soviets came up with this. Would the next war be won in one decisive campaign, or would it be a long struggle of attrition, like the Battle of Britain? So we've run out of time. We'll talk about this next time. You guys are going to get good at Barbarossa. So we got the Battle of Britain, the Battle of Barbarossa, and then everything else is just a matter of time. Like everything else, World War II just falls in place. Okay, so everybody needs to have a book. And Frank, I got the book. Oh, yeah. And do you have a book that you can possibly share? Please. Can you share?
I have one.
You have one? Oh, sorry. Oh, wait. So that's it. Yeah. Oh, I actually have more.